Alright, it has been a minute since I've made an iceberg video. I have had so many requests to make another one of these after I did that last 3-part series on one, so I just figured why the hell not, let's do another. Now in case you don't know how an iceberg chart works, basically the stuff in the upper tiers is going to be the more widely known topics, and as we get deeper and go into more of the bottom layers of the iceberg, that's where you're going to find more darker, sort of less known topics. Basically, as the video goes on, we get into more and more sort of obscure and unexplainable territory. Now before we start, I do want to say that this is actually the first iceberg chart that I've made personally. I really haven't even finished the iceberg. I got pretty far into it, but I do want to come back and add on a couple more layers at the bottom. So if you guys end up liking this video and if the topics in here are good, just let me know and I will probably end up finishing this off, and maybe we'll have 2 or even 3 parts. Now with all of that stuff out of the way, let's jump in to the Unexplained Incidents Iceberg. The disappearance of the Eilean Mor Lighthouse Keepers. On December 26, 1900, a ship was making its way to Eilean Mor, a remote island off the west coast of Scotland, which, apart from the lighthouse keepers, had no inhabitants. On board the ship were Captain James Harvey and Joseph Moore, who was set to replace one of the lighthouse keepers currently stationed on the island. As the ship approached the island, Captain Harvey noticed how strange it was that nobody had been there to greet them at the landing platform. He blew his horn and set up a flare to try and get the attention of the lighthouse workers, but there was no response. Joseph Moore rowed his boat to shore, walked up the long set of stairs, and was met with immediate signs that something was terribly wrong. First, the door to the lighthouse was unlocked. Upon going inside, he noticed that 2 of the 3 oilskinned coats were missing from the entrance hall. Pressing on into the kitchen area, Moore found some half-eaten food and an overturned chair. The scene seemed to indicate that there had been an abrupt hurry from the kitchen. After looking around, Moore also found the beds to be unmade, but was unable to locate any of the 3 workers. He rushed back down to the landing stage to tell the captain what had happened. After a complete search, it was determined that the 3 men were not inside the lighthouse or anywhere on the island. Searching through the workers' logs revealed an unusual string of entries. On the 12th of December, Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, wrote of, quote, "severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He also noted that James Ducat, the principal keeper, had been very quiet, and that the third assistant, William MacArthur, had been crying. Now, William MacArthur was seasoned in this line of work. It's very strange that he would have been crying about a storm. Log entries a day later on the 13th of December stated that the storm was still raging and that all 3 men had been praying. Why would 3 experienced lighthouse keepers safely situated on a brand new lighthouse that was 150 feet above sea level be praying for a storm to stop? What makes all of this even more strange is the fact that no storms had been reported in the area when these entries were written. In fact, the weather should have been perfectly calm during those days. The final entry was made on the 15th of December. It simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." It's important to note that one of the oil-skinned coats was still hanging in the hall. These islands are very cold, especially in the dead of winter. Why would one of the men leave without grabbing his coat? Also of note is the fact that it would have been strictly prohibited for all 3 men to leave their posts at the same time, so what drew all 3 of them outside? Now, at the beginning of the investigation, it was assumed that all of these lighthouse keepers had just been swept out to sea by this huge storm that they had been talking about. However, this doesn't really make any sense, as there was plenty of evidence to suggest that the weather had been completely calm for those couple of days. On top of that, the final entry actually does state that this storm ended, followed by the phrase, "God is over all." From what I've placed together, it seems that 2 of the men were already outside when some sort of an emergency caused the 3rd man who was sitting in the kitchen to jump up and run outside. Perhaps they had yelled back to the lighthouse for help, causing that 3rd man to jump out of his seat. The chair falls back, he runs outside without his coat, and he somehow perishes however the other 2 did. But then again, that's really just a guess. There's no answers here. I'm sure it goes without saying that the 3 men were never seen again. The Falcon Lake Incident. Before I begin this next one, I do want to stress that although it might sound a little bit absurd at first, this is one of the most documented UFO cases pretty much in history, and some of the evidence that we're going to get to is just kind of mind-blowing. Even if it wasn't some alien or whatever, it's very difficult to draw a conclusion from this story. The Falcon Lake Incident occurred on May 20th, 1967 at Falcon Lake in the Canadian province of Manitoba. The incident was widely investigated by many different Canadian authorities, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Royal Canadian Air Force, the Department of Health, as well as the Department of National Defense. The United States Air Force was even sent to Canada to aid in the investigation. Steve Michalak, an amateur geologist, regularly traveled to Falcon Lake searching for quartz and silver. He had previously staked a claim in the Falcon Lake area to prospect for precious metals and left for the area on a long weekend in May 1967. He was aware that quartz veins within Whiteshell Provincial Park yielded precious metals such as gold and nickel. While investigating a quartz vein, Michalak claimed that he was startled by the sounds of a flock of geese who had suddenly become agitated. According to Michalak, he looked up to see 2 objects hovering around 45 meters away from him, emitting a reddish glow. He described the objects as cigarette-shaped. He attempted to find any identifying insignia, but found none. The landed craft also changed in color between gray and red and resembled, quote, hot stainless steel, with a golden glow emanating around the vehicle. Michalak recalled the scent of sulfur and sounds of a whirring motor, as well as a hissing sound from air being expelled. According to Michalak, he could hear the voices of individuals which were muffled by the sounds produced. Michalak claimed that the speakers sounded human with 2 discernible voices, one higher than the other. He attempted to touch the craft, and he found it so hot that the fingertips of his gloves melted. Michalak says that the craft then turned counterclockwise, revealing a panel with a grid of holes that emanated a blast of heated gas, which hit him in the chest, blew him backward, and set fire to his clothing. Michalak says he immediately tore the burning clothing off as the craft flew away. He says that he was disoriented from the event, feeling nauseous and eventually vomiting before struggling to return to his motel room at the Falcon Motor Hotel. Michalak spoke with the owner of the motel about seeing a doctor, but was told that the local doctor was absent. He then rested and phoned his wife, telling her that an accident had occurred and that he would be returning home. Upon his arrival, Michalak sought medical attention at the Misericordia Health Center for his injuries and was admitted to the emergency room. Michalak suffered burns on his chest and stomach which matched with his claims of being hit by the exhaust panel. A grid-like pattern of raised sores from his burns appeared on Michalak's body. He continued to suffer from prolonged bouts of diarrhea, headaches, blackouts, and continued weight loss, eventually seeking help from the Mayo Clinic, who determined that Michalak was of sound mind. His physical condition following the event was consistent with radiation poisoning. Michalak allegedly lost 13 pounds following the incident, with his lymphocyte count drastically falling to near lethal levels. He continued to suffer from intermittent reappearances of his burns, as well as other side effects, until his death in 1999. An investigation was held to determine exactly what happened to Michalak, but it only led to more questions than answers. Investigators say they found a 15-foot circle of burned vegetation right where he says this landing happened. They also found several examples of highly radioactive material in the soil as well as on the clothes that Michalak had ripped off. It's also important to note that Michalak, right up until his death in 1999, held the belief that this was just some sort of an experimental aircraft and didn't believe it was aliens or of any extraterrestrial origin. The Overtoun Bridge Dogs. The Overtoun Bridge is a fairly small bridge located near Dumbarton in West Dumbartonshire, Scotland. Throughout the 1950s, locals started referring to the bridge as the Bridge of Death, or the Dog's Side Bridge, as it was reported that dogs, upon approaching the bridge, would leap down into the ravine below for no apparent reason. In 2004, Kenneth Meikle was walking with his family and golden retriever when the dog suddenly bolted and jumped off the bridge. It survived, but was traumatized by the experience. Going into 2005, at least 5 other dogs also jumped over the course of just 6 months. There are an astonishing number of reports of dogs just jumping off that bridge. Like, literally since the 1950s, there have been at least 600 incidents. There have been a number of different attempts to explain what has been happening at the bridge, including different scents in the area to some possible spiritual or otherwise paranormal cause. However, investigators have yet to come to any sort of a reasonable conclusion. The 2006 Mumbai Sweet Seawater Incident. The 2006 Mumbai Sweet Seawater Incident was a strange phenomenon during which residents of Mumbai claimed that the water at Mahim Creek had suddenly turned sweet. Within hours, residents of the surrounding area claimed that the seawater at Taithal Beach had turned sweet as well. This caused a mass hysteria among people who started coming in large numbers to drink the seawater. This quickly presented a major problem to local authorities as nearby waterways receive thousands of tons of raw sewage and industrial waste every single day. Others were seen collecting water as rubbish and plastic drifted past them. Since the creek is known to be highly polluted, it is definitely not out of the question that some sort of pollutant found its way into the water and caused the sweet taste. The thing is though, even if we knew exactly what caused the sweet taste in the water, that doesn't explain why thousands of people ran into this very clearly polluted creek and started drinking the water. I guess the likely explanation here is that it was just a simple case of mass hysteria, but even then it's such a strange event. Stanley Meyer's fuel cell. Stanley Allen Meyer was a gifted inventor from Columbus, Ohio, who, by the time he passed away, had filed for a large number of patents which can easily still be researched and viewed online to this day. However, his most notable patented invention was the water fuel cell, which purportedly split water into its component elements, hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen gas was then burned to generate energy. According to Meyer, the device required less energy to perform electrolysis than the minimum energy requirement predicted or measured by conventional science.
So what you're really seeing with the water fuel cell as it is today is that we have a full system engineering approach, allowing us now to use water as a main fuel source to be able to run a conventional engine and run it on water and do it and equal or supersede the performance of a car running on gasoline and diesel fuel.
On March 20th, 1998, Stanley, his brother, and 2 Belgian investors raised glasses in the Grove City Cracker Barrel. Stephen, Stanley's brother, has gone on record stating the following. Stanley took a sip of cranberry juice. Then he grabbed his neck, bolted out the door, dropped to his knees, and vomited violently. I ran outside and asked him, "What's wrong?" He said, "They poisoned me." That was his dying declaration. Many people who knew Stanley think that he was murdered, as his invention could have massively paved the way for free energy. Other evidence that he was murdered was that Meyer's patents attracted much unwanted attention from governments, mysterious visitors from overseas, and lucrative buyout offers. His brother Stephen even said that the two Belgian investors who were with Stanley on the day of the murder seemed to know something. Quote, "I told them that Stan had died, and they never said a word. Absolutely nothing. No condolences, no questions." Many of the initial reactions to the story were that, to be frank, this was just all bullshit. Stanley's invention would have directly broken both the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which, according to conventional science, is obviously impossible. However, knowing that had Stanley been right, had he actually invented something that was capable of turning water into an efficient method of fuel, that would have clearly completely changed humanity's relationship with energy and would have completely disrupted multiple industries. Now, with that in mind, who were these two Belgian investors? What happened in that restaurant? And most importantly, was Stanley onto something that would have completely changed the world? The Silent Twins. June and Jennifer Gibbons, also known as the Silent Twins, were born on the 11th of April, 1963. The twin sisters were inseparable from birth and had a sort of strange obsession with each other. When growing up, they spoke very fast and had developed a speech impediment, which, accompanied with the language they spoke, a sort of sped-up Bayesian Creole, made it difficult for people to understand them. The twins were the only black children in their community and were often the victims of bullying while they attended school. This would prove to be extremely traumatic for the twins, who slowly began receding into their own little world. The twins' language began to change with time, diverging from the Bayesian Creole it originated from. Soon, their language became completely unintelligible to others. The twins would go on to become increasingly reserved and eventually spoke to no one except each other and their younger sister Rose. They began to sink deep into their own imaginary world, writing novels and plays with one another with a complete disregard towards the outside world. The girls eventually refused to read or write during their schooling. Upon the recommendation of a medic at their school, the twins began seeing a succession of therapists who tried unsuccessfully to get them to communicate with others. In a desperate attempt to break their isolation, the twins were sent to separate boarding schools. However, they each quickly became unresponsive and entirely catatonic without the presence of the other. They literally wouldn't sleep, eat, or even use the bathroom, just total withdrawal. Things started to degrade even further for the twins when they entered their teenage years and began using drugs and alcohol. In 1981, the girls committed a number of crimes, first starting with vandalism and petty theft, eventually escalating all the way to arson, resulting in the twins burning down several buildings, including a tractor factory. This led to their being admitted to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security mental health hospital. They remained together at the hospital for 11 years. Placed on high doses of antipsychotic medications, they found themselves unable to concentrate. Jennifer apparently developed tardive dyskinesia, a neurological disorder resulting in involuntary, repetitive movements. The girls had a long-standing agreement that if one died, the other must begin to speak and live a normal life. During their stay in the hospital, they began to believe that it was necessary for one of them to die, and after much discussion, Jennifer agreed to make the sacrifice of her life. She would later tell her parole officer that she knew everything was going to be okay because she was going to die soon. In March 1993, the twins were transferred from Broadmoor to the more open Caswell Clinic in Bridgend, Wales. On arrival, Jennifer could not be roused. She was taken to the hospital where she died soon after of acute myocarditis, a sudden inflammation of the heart. There was no evidence of drugs or poison in her system. At the inquest, June revealed that Jennifer had been acting strangely for about a day before their release. Her speech had been slurring, and she had said that she was dying. On the trip to Caswell, she had slept in June's lap with her eyes open. Several days later, it was reported that June was in a strange mood. She said, "I'm free at last, liberated, and at last, Jennifer has given up her life for me." She also described it as a tsunami, washing her of her sins and being free of her sister. After Jennifer's death, June would go on to give several interviews about her and her sister's lives before, in 2008, living a perfectly quiet, normal life. Now, there are many different unexplained factors in regards to this case that are very interesting to me. First, what caused these twins to spiral downward into such a mentally reclusive and obsessive space? Why did it happen to these two in particular and not, like, every other set of twins? And second, something that is not very widely discussed is the fact that Jennifer seems to have, willfully caused her own death. It literally sounds like the two sisters decided that one of them had to die, they debated it for a little bit, and then when that person was determined to be Jennifer, she just died, and that was it. The crew of the Mary Celeste. On November 7th, 1872, the 282-ton Mary Celeste set sail from New York Harbor on its way to Genoa, Italy. On board were the ship's captain, Benjamin S. Briggs, his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, along with 8 crew members. Less than a month later, on December 5th, a passing British ship called Dei Gratia came within viewing distance of a vessel heading unsteadily towards them. The helmsman reported the ship to Dei Gratia's Captain Morehouse. The ship's erratic movements and the odd set of her sails led Morehouse to suspect that something was wrong. As the vessel drew close, he could see nobody on deck, and he received no reply to his signals. So he sent DeVoe and second mate John Wright in a ship's boat to investigate. The pair established that this was the Mary Celeste by the name on her stern. They then climbed aboard and found the ship completely deserted. The sails were in a poor condition, some missing altogether, and much of the rigging was damaged with ropes hanging loosely over the sides. However, other than this, there was no real structural damage to the ship. The ship's single lifeboat was missing, and there was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, which was a significant but not unusual amount of water for such a large ship. After looking around, they found the ship's daily log. Its final entry was dated 8 a.m. on November 25th, 9 days earlier. It recorded the Mary Celeste's position off Santa Maria Island in the Azores, nearly 400 nautical miles from the point where they currently were. DeVoe saw that the cabin interiors were wet and untidy from water that had entered through doorways and skylights, but were otherwise in reasonable order. Most of the ship's papers were missing, along with the captain's navigational instruments. However, the ship still contained 6 months' worth of food and water. There were no obvious signs of fire or violence. The evidence indicated an orderly departure from the ship by means of the missing lifeboat. Experts have stated that for an experienced captain such as Briggs, the decision to have escaped via lifeboat would have only been done as an extremely drastic last resort. This would have only been justifiable if it seemed that the ship was going to completely sink, which doesn't seem to have been the case. Now, here's an interesting theory I read, which seems to be the most likely one in my opinion. It is possible that after several weeks of storms, the crew opened up the lower storage and went to check on the alcohol barrels, only to find some very powerful fumes. Perhaps fearing an explosion, they had everyone climb down onto this lifeboat, which they anchored to the Mary Celeste and were towed behind it. Now, they did not furl the sails completely, which would have made the boat go a lot faster. Possibly this created too much tension for the rope, and it broke, leaving their lifeboat stranded in the middle of nowhere. This series of events pretty much perfectly checks out because there were several ropes found dangling over the side of the ship. They also found that the lifeboat ropes, which used to hold the lifeboat up, were actually cut down instead of being untied, which implies that it was done with haste. Now, I do kind of hope that this theory is not true, because can you imagine being completely stranded in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in a little lifeboat, watching your only last hope of life just drifting off into the distance? It's just a terrifying thought. The Disappearance of Maura Murray. Maura Murray, born May 4th, 1982, is an American woman who disappeared on the evening of February 9th, 2004 after a car crash on Route 112 near Woodsville, New Hampshire. To this day, nearly 20 years later, her whereabouts remain unknown. At the time of her disappearance, she was a 21-year-old nursing student completing her junior year at the University of Massachusetts. On Saturday, February 7th, Murray's father, Fred, arrived in Amherst. He told investigators he and Murray went car shopping that afternoon and later went to dinner with a friend of his daughter. Murray dropped her father off at his motel room and, borrowing his Toyota Corolla, returned to campus to attend a dorm party. She arrived at 10:30 p.m. At 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, February 8th, she left the party. At approximately 3:30 a.m., en route to her father's motel, she struck a guardrail on Route 9, causing nearly $10,000 worth of damage to her father's car. The responding officer wrote an accident report, but there is no documentation of field sobriety tests being conducted. Murray was driven to her father's motel and stayed in his room for the rest of the morning. Later Sunday morning, Fred Murray learned that the damage to his vehicle would be covered by his auto insurance. He rented a car, dropped Murray off at the university, and departed for Connecticut. After midnight on Monday, February 9th, Murray used her personal computer to search MapQuest for directions to the Berkshires and Burlington, Vermont. The first reported contact Murray had with anyone on February 9th was at 1:00 p.m. when she emailed her boyfriend the following message. "I love you more, stud. I've got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promise to call today, though. Love you, Maura." She also made a phone call inquiring about renting a condominium at the same Bartlett, New Hampshire condo association her family had vacationed to in the past. Telephone records indicate that the call lasted 3 minutes. The owner did not rent the condo to Murray. On the afternoon of Monday, February 9th at 1:24 p.m., Murray emailed a work supervisor of the nursing school faculty that she would be out of town for a week due to a death in her family. However, according to her family, they had not experienced a death. She also said she would contact them when she returned. At 2:05 p.m., Murray called a number which provides recorded information about booking hotels in Stowe, Vermont. At 2:18 p.m., she telephoned her boyfriend and left a voice message promising him they would talk later. This call ended after 1 minute. In her car, Murray packed clothing, toiletries, college textbooks, and birth control pills. Her room would later be searched by campus police, who would find most of her belongings packed in boxes and all of her art taken down off the walls, indicating that her sudden departure likely involved premeditation to a certain degree. Around 3:30 p.m., she drove off the campus in her black 1996 Saturn sedan. At 3:40 p.m., Murray withdrew $280 from an ATM. CCTV footage showed that she was alone at the time of the withdrawal. Murray then purchased several alcoholic beverages at a nearby liquor store. Security footage shows that she was alone when she made that purchase as well. Murray then left Amherst between 4 and 5 p.m., presumably via Interstate 91 North. She called to check her voicemail at 4:37 p.m., the last recorded use of her cell phone. To date, there is no indication that she had informed anyone of her destination or any evidence that she had even chosen one. Sometime around 7:00 p.m., a Woodsville, New Hampshire resident heard a loud sound outside her house. Through her window, she could see a car up against a snowbank along Route 112. At 7:27 p.m., she called 911 to report the accident. According to the call log, the woman claimed to have seen a man smoking a cigarette inside the car. However, she later seemed to retract this statement, stating that she had not seen a man nor a person smoking a cigarette, but rather had seen what appeared to be a red light glowing from inside the car, potentially from a cell phone. A passing motorist, a school bus driver who lived nearby, stopped at the scene. They saw the car as well as a young woman walking around the vehicle. The school bus driver noted that the young woman was not bleeding or visibly injured, but cold and shivering. He offered to call for help, but she asked and might have even pleaded with him not to call the police, and assured him she had already called AAA, though, strangely, AAA has no record of any such call. Aware that there was no cell reception in the area, the man continued home and called the police. His call was received by the sheriff's department at 7:43 p.m. According to the official police log, 3 minutes later at 7:46 p.m., a Haverhill police officer arrived at the scene, but the woman driver had disappeared. No one was inside or around the car. The car had impacted a tree on the driver's side of the vehicle, severely damaging the left headlight and pushing the car's radiator into the fan, rendering it inoperable. The car's windshield was cracked on the driver's side and both airbags had deployed. The car was locked, and a rag believed to have been part of Murray's emergency roadside kit was discovered stuffed into the Saturn's muffler pipe. Inside and outside the car, he discovered red stains that looked to be red wine. Inside the car, the officer found an empty beer bottle and a damaged box of Franzia wine on the rear seat. In addition, he found a AAA card issued to Murray, blank accident report forms, gloves, compact discs, makeup, diamond jewelry, driving directions to Burlington, Vermont, Murray's favorite stuffed animal, and Not Without Peril, a book about mountain climbing in the White Mountains. Missing were Murray's debit card, credit cards, and cell phone, none of which have been located or used since her disappearance. The police later reported some of the bottles of purchased liquor were also missing. Police traced the vehicle to Murray and initially treated her as a missing person on the belief that she may have wanted to disappear voluntarily. Following her initial disappearance, a contractor returning home saw a young woman moving quickly on foot eastbound on Route 112 about 4 to 5 miles east of where Murray's vehicle was discovered. He noted that the young person was wearing jeans, a dark coat, and a light-colored hood. He did not report it to police immediately due to his own confusion of the dates, only discovering 3 months later that he had spotted the young person the same night Murray disappeared. It is unclear if this sighting was Murray. She was never seen again. There is a lot to unpack here. What's strange about this specific case, along with, I guess, a lot of the other ones in this video, the more you seem to examine the little pieces, the less they seem to fit together. For example, she only looked up directions for going to Burlington, Vermont earlier that morning and didn't tell anyone about it. That seems to indicate that this was done without much planning at all, right? But then, how do you explain all of her stuff being boxed up in her dorm room, even non-essential stuff like art, just ready to go? It looked like she was planning on, completely restarting her life or moving somewhere else. For some reason, though, it looks like something drove her to make this decision much quicker and with much more haste, leaving behind all of her stuff and leaving in the middle of the night. And then that seems to make sense for a second, but then you remember the fact that she literally was communicating with her boyfriend throughout the day completely normally, as if she didn't intend on doing anything. She even inquired through phone call trying to buy a condo with connections to her family, which seems to imply she wasn't trying to just disappear. Although it has been nearly 20 years at this point, I do hope that her family and the public at least find out what really happened, even if the answers are a bit grim, because that uncertainty just, I don't know, it's gotta be eating away at the family. I just can't even imagine what it would be like to lose someone in such a cloudy way, you know? I do hope that they get some answers at some point in the future. The Isdal Woman. November 29th, 1970. A man and his 2 young daughters were hiking in the foothills of an area known as the Ice Valley. One of the daughters noted an unusual burning smell while climbing along some loose stones. There, she would make a grisly discovery. The charred body of a woman located among the rocks. Surprised and fearful, the group returned to town to notify the police of their discovery. Examining the site, police noted the woman's supine position, her clenched hands up by her torso, and the absence of a nearby campfire. The front of her body and her clothes had been severely burned to the point where she had become completely unrecognizable. Several personal items were found around the body, including traces of burned paper. Discovered beneath it was a fur hat, which was later found to have traces of petrol. All identifying marks and labels on these items had been removed or rubbed off. However, her fingerprints remained and were eventually found to match another set of fingerprints on dark glasses found in a suitcase abandoned in a train station locker in nearby Bergen. 3 days later, investigators found 2 suitcases belonging to the woman at Bergen railway station. In the lining of one, police discovered 5 100 Deutschmark notes, or about 1,000 2023 US dollars. As with the body, any possible identifying information had been removed from all items inside the suitcase. An autopsy concluded the woman had died from a combination of incapacitation by phenobarbital and poisoning by carbon monoxide. Soot was found in her lungs, indicating that she was alive as she burned, and her neck was bruised, possibly from a fall or by a blow. Analysis of her blood and stomach showed that she had consumed between 50 and 70 Phenomol brand sleeping pills. Police then launched an appeal for information in the Norwegian media regarding the case. The last time she was seen alive was on the 23rd of November when she checked out of room 407 of the Hotel Hordoheimen. Hotel staff told police that she was good-looking and roughly 5 foot 4 inches tall with dark brown hair and small brown eyes. Staff noted that the woman kept mainly to her room and seemed to be on guard. When she checked out, she paid her bill in cash and requested a taxi. Her movements between then and the discovery of her body remain unknown. Based on handwritten check-in forms, police determined that the Isdal woman had traveled around Norway and Europe with at least 8 fake passports and aliases. While details such as birthdays and occupations changed from one form to another, she consistently gave her nationality as Belgian. The forms were filled out in either German or French. It was also discovered that the woman had previously stayed at several hotels in Bergen and was known to change rooms after checking in. She often told hotel staff that she was a traveling saleswoman and antiques dealer. One witness said that she overheard the woman talking to a man in German in a Bergen hotel. Others who met her mentioned that she also spoke Flemish and broken English and smelled of garlic. People who saw or met her also commented that she wore wigs. Composite sketches based on witness descriptions and analysis of her body were then circulated in many countries. Despite the significant police resources deployed, the unknown woman was never identified, and the case was quickly closed. While authorities concluded that she had committed suicide by ingestion of sleeping pills, others believe the evidence suggests that she was murdered. Alright, I just can't understand how the official report states that this was a suicide. I can understand the sleeping pills part of it leading to that conclusion, but are they just ignoring the fact that this woman was literally burned alive? I mean, how does that at all point to suicide? This wasn't just done to get rid of the body either. The autopsy report shows that there was soot in her lungs, which apparently indicates that she was alive while this was happening. Now, to me and many others, there seems to be a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that this woman was some sort of a Cold War spy. Any identifying markings that were on all of her belongings had been completely rubbed off. She had been traveling all across Europe, and she had been using at least 8 different passports and aliases. Clearly, though, this woman got caught up in some serious shit, and it ended up costing her life. The case eventually went cold, and the woman was never identified. It's very unlikely that we'll ever figure out who she was or what happened to her.
The Khamar Daban Incident. Upon first glance, the Khamar Daban Incident might remind you of a similar case which took place in Dyatlov Pass, where several Soviet hikers died under extremely bizarre circumstances back in February of 1959. While that case has been covered many times, not as well known is a similar incident which took place in Khamar Daban, a Russian mountain range in southern Siberia. 41-year-old Lyudmila Korovina was an experienced hiking instructor and survivalist labeled as a master by her peers and students. In the summer of 1993, Lyudmila had planned a hike with 6 of her students to the Khamar Daban mountain range. She was very experienced in the area, which was a very popular tourist spot and considered a very safe place to hike, especially in the summer. Her students had trained with her for the trip, and they all shared a close-knit relationship. The member who was closest to Lyudmila was 23-year-old Alexander Sacha Krysyan. The other 5 students were 24-year-old Tatiana Filipenko, 19-year-old Denis Svachkin, 17-year-old Valentina Valya Udachenko, 16-year-old Victoria Zalisova, and 15-year-old Timur Bapanov. On August 2nd, 1993, the group of 7 arrived in the town of Marino in preparation for their journey into the mountains. The weather forecast promised them clear, sunny skies. Lyudmila and her students were one of 3 hiking groups in the area, one of which was being led by Lyudmila's daughter, Natalia. The 2 groups had plans to meet up on August 5th when their hiking routes would cross paths. All of the 6 students were ready to begin their hike, as this was their chance to prove themselves experienced hikers. This was a journey they had been planning for and anticipating for months, and as a result, the group had become close. The group made extremely good time for the first 2 days of the hike, but by August 4th, as they were beginning their descent, the weather forecast would turn out to have been wrong, and the area was hit with a powerful rainstorm. The added weight to the hikers' supplies caused by the rain significantly slowed them down and quickly exhausted them. This led Lyudmila to make the decision to camp out hastily in an exposed location. The group had attempted to build a fire that night, but were unsuccessful. Still, despite their recent troubles, they appear to have been motivated and excited to continue their hike. The following morning, they planned to meet up with Natalia and expected to be able to do so, given how quickly they had made their way up the mountain the previous day. However, later that day, Natalia and her group made it to the meeting spot, but her mother never appeared. Eventually, the group was forced to move on, assuming that the bad weather had set their group back. Sadly, the truth was far more gruesome. On August 10th, a group of kayakers noticed something in the tree line as they were paddling down a river at the base of the mountains. A lone girl was standing there, staring at them. The kayakers got out of their boats and approached the girl. The girl became hysterical when trying to explain her story to the kayakers. Some sources claim that she was covered in dry blood. She told them that her name was Valentina Udachenko and said that she had been hiking with 6 others. Horrified, the kayakers took Valya to the nearest police station where a report was filed. However, she appeared to have been so traumatized by whatever she experienced that she would only be able to slowly reveal the details over days, weeks. Some details even took years for her to explain in detail. According to Valya, after eating breakfast that morning, the group descended the mountain, but a short while later, the first catastrophe occurred. From the back of the crowd, Sacha started to scream. When everyone turned to look at him, he was frothing at the mouth and bleeding from his eyes and ears. He collapsed on the ground, shaking before becoming motionless. Ludmila sprinted over to him and told the others to go on. She was extremely distraught, trying in vain to get Sacha to regain consciousness. The remaining group did not get far before they heard Ludmila cry out. As they turned and ran to her, they saw that she was having the same symptoms as Sacha. Her eyes and nose were pouring blood, and she was frothing at the mouth. She convulsed and then collapsed on top of Sacha. Tatiana, who had gotten to Ludmila first, was the next to collapse, grabbing at her throat as though she couldn't breathe. She slowly crawled over to a nearby rock and bashed her head against it until she went limp. Victoria and Timur both ran while Dennis hid behind a rock. Valya stood unable to move, having just watched 3 of her closest friends seemingly die within only a few minutes. Both Victoria and Timur collapsed while running and died in a similar manner, throwing up blood and clawing at their own throats, tearing their clothes off. Realizing that they were the only ones left, Valya and Dennis ran to each other and hurried away from the site of their friend's death. It wasn't long, however, before Dennis collapsed convulsing. Scared for her life, Valya ran and left her friends behind. Valya ran down the mountain until she felt that she had escaped whatever fate her friends had succumbed to. Under adequate tree cover, she set up the tent for the night and fell asleep. After waking up, Valya knew immediately that she would need supplies if she was going to survive alone in the wilderness. The problem was that she'd have to return to the site of her friend's death to retrieve them. Realizing that she had no other choice, Valya made the trek back up the mountain, retracing her steps. When she reached the site, she saw that none of them had moved from the spots where they had fallen. Assessing that they were all deceased, Valya quickly took the supplies she needed from their bodies and left, following power lines. She followed the power lines down the mountain for 4 days in the hopes that someone would come across her before she discovered a river and started following it. By the end of her 4th day, the kayakers had located and saved her. Despite the police receiving a report, no formal search was carried out until the 24th of August. It took several days for the helicopters to locate the remains of the group due to Valya's struggle to recount exactly what happened to authorities. An autopsy was conducted. They were all found to have bruised lungs, yet, astonishingly, all of them, except Ludmila, who apparently had a heart attack, were found to have died of hypothermia.
Okay, hypothermia doesn't really make any sense. There's really no shortage of theories for this one, but like all of the other topics in this video, the pieces just seem to fit together less and less the more you look into them. Many have speculated that the group may have wandered into an area used for Russian chemical testing. The symptoms Valya reported the group experiencing are very similar to what you might expect from exposure to nerve gas or a similar chemical agent. However, why would they be doing chemical testing right in a very popular hiking spot? Don't you think they would have maybe gone farther out into Siberia and done it in a remote area? Also, since Valya was in such close proximity to the others, you would have expected her to have experienced some kind of symptoms, right? But apparently she had none. Another theory posits that the group may have foraged for food and ate something toxic, like a mushroom or something. However, Korovina was a very experienced hiker and knew the area like the back of her hand. It's not likely that she would have made such a fatal mistake. Even so, Valya has claimed that the group ate well during the whole trip, so it's unlikely that they would have had to forage for food. We'll probably never know what the group encountered on the mountains that day.